My mother-in-law put me in the hospital and then tried to silence me, but the ER doctor called 911 after seeing the x-ray. I hope you enjoy this story. Claire Elizabeth Brennan Whitman, 39. I used to be a corporate counsel for Sullivan and Hayes, the kind of woman who moved through mahogany halls with a briefcase that felt like a shield. Now my world is smaller. It's Lily, our 4-year-old, and the quiet, crushing weight of being a Whitman wife in Upper Arlington. White light, too bright. It doesn't just hit my eyes, it stabs through them, anchoring somewhere deep in the base of my skull. Beep, beep, beep. The sound is a rhythm of glass breaking over and over. My tongue feels like a piece of dry wool. I try to swallow, but my throat is filled with needles. Where is the floor? My legs feel long and disconnected, like they belong to a doll tossed in a corner. Something is wet on my face, sticky, cold. Ceiling tiles, 1, 2, 3, they're flickering. Or maybe I am. Fragments. I remember stairs, dark wood polished until it looked like water. I remember the scent of Chanel No. 5, heavy and floral like an open casket. And a hand on my chest, small but as solid as iron. Then the weightlessness, the sickening rotation of the world. Wall, ceiling, wall. Impact. A voice cuts through the fog. It's honeyed. It's perfect. It's the sound of a velvet curtain closing over a crime scene. She's waking up Graham. Oh, thank goodness. Margaret. I try to turn my head. The movement sends a flare of white heat across my vision. I'm in a room that smells of bleach and old flowers. The Harold Whitman Memorial Wing. My father-in-law's name is etched in brass on the door I just passed through. Claire! Claire, honey, can you hear me? That's Graham, my husband. His voice is thin, trembling like a wire about to snap. I feel his hand on mine, but it's cold. He's looking at me, but his eyes keep darting toward the woman standing behind him. Margaret stands at the foot of the bed. Her silver hair is set in a perfect, unshakable wave. Her pearls catch the harsh hospital light. She looks like a portrait of grief, but her eyes are blue ice. They aren't looking at my bandages. They're calculating the distance between my memory and her narrative. You gave us such a scare, darling, Margaret says. She steps closer, the click of her heels on the linoleum sounding like a gavel. Tripping like that, you've been so exhausted lately. We told you that you needed more rest. The stairs. I wasn't exhausted. I was walking toward the door. I was going to take Lily and leave. Tripped, I whisper. My own voice sounds like someone else's high and cracked. The dizziness. Margaret says, her voice a soothing hum that makes my skin crawl. You mentioned it at dinner. You reached for the banister, but you just slipped. It happened so fast. I tried to catch you, Claire. I really did. I look at her hands. They're folded neatly over her designer bag. No scratches. No signs of a struggle. Just the calm, terrifying poise of a woman who has never lost a battle. I remember the hand. I remember the push. I look at Graham. He's nodding. He's repeating her words under his breath like a prayer he's trying to believe. The doctor said head injuries are tricky. Graham says, his voice pleading. She said you might be confused. But it's okay now. You're safe. We're all here. Safe. The word feels like a threat. A door swish opens. A woman in a white coat walks in. Her name tag reads, Dr. Nina Okafor. She doesn't look at Margaret first. She looks at the monitors, then at me. Her eyes are sharp, clinical, and completely unimpressed by the Whitman name. Mrs. Whitman, the doctor says. I'm Dr. Okafor. We've stabilized the fracture and we've removed the debris from the laceration. Debris. The debris, I ask. Dr. Okafor holds up a small clear plastic bag. Inside something glitters, a sharp, jagged triangle of glass, clear and heavy. Crystal, the doctor says. High quality, Waterford, I'd wager. We found it embedded deep in the scalp wound. My mind flashes back to the hallway table. The heavy, ornate vase that Margaret's husband had given her 30 years ago. It sat 10 feet from the top of the stairs. If I had tripped, I would have fallen forward away from the table. To have Crystal in my head, I would have had to hit the table first, or the vase would have had to hit me. I look at Margaret. For a split second, the mask ripples. Her jaw tightens. Just a fraction of a millimeter. The vase, Margaret says, her voice steady but a pitch higher. It must have toppled when she reached out to steady herself. It was such a chaotic moment. Physics is rarely chaotic, Mrs. Whitman, Dr. Okafor says. She turns back to me, her voice dropping. Claire, I need you to tell me exactly what you remember. Before the fall. I feel Margaret's gaze. It's a physical weight on my chest, the same pressure I felt at the top of the stairs. I look at Graham. He's staring at the floor, his shoulders hunched, making himself small. My jaw aches. I'm grinding my teeth so hard I can hear the click in my ears. The lawyer in me wants to build the case. The mother in me wants to scream for Lily. But the woman in this bed, broken and surrounded by the Whitman legacy, is terrified. It's okay, Margaret says, stepping forward to tuck the thin hospital blanket around my legs. The gesture is possessive. Take your time, dear. We know how fragile you've been. We'll tell the doctor everything she needs to know. Fragile? That's the word they'll use. To the police, to the judge, to my daughter. I look at the crystal in the plastic bag. It's a piece of the truth, sharp and cold. Dr. Okafor is still watching me. She isn't nodding like the nurses. She isn't smiling like Margaret. She's waiting. I remember the stairs, I say. I meet Margaret's ice blue eyes. I remember the stairs perfectly. Margaret's smile doesn't move, but her fingers cinch tight on the edge of my blanket. Good, she whispers. Then you remember how much we love you. I close my eyes. The beep of the monitor is the only sound in the room, counting down the seconds until the lies become permanent. I have to get out of this wing. I have to get out of this family. But as the darkness pulls at me again, I realize the Harold Whitman Memorial Wing isn't a place of healing. It's a cage with my name on the chart. The sun bleeds through the hospital blinds in jagged clinical stripes, cutting across the sterile white sheets of my bed. Every time I blink, the light feels like a physical weight pressing against my bruised eyelids. My head throbbed with a rhythmic dull heat that seemed to keep time with the steady, insistent beep of the heart monitor. The world felt tilted, a deck of a ship lost in a fog, and I was clawing my way back to the surface of a sea made of ether and antiseptic. The heavy door pushed open with a hushed pneumatic hiss. I didn't need to look to know who it was. The scent arrived first, a suffocating cloud of Chanel No. 5 that smelled of expensive funerals and ironclad expectations. Then came the rhythmic sharp click of Italian leather heels on the linoleum. Margaret moved into my line of sight, her silver hair perfectly set, not a single strand out of place despite the early hour. She carried a bouquet of lilies that looked too white, too perfect, like they belonged at a wake rather than a sick room. "You're awake," Margaret said, her voice a practiced melody of maternal concern. She leaned over and set the flowers on the nightstand, her eyes scanning my face with a terrifying, predatory precision. "We were so worried about you, Claire. You gave us such a fright." "Where is Lily?" I managed to whisper. My throat felt like it had been scrubbed with sandpaper, and the effort to speak sent a fresh wave of nausea rolling through my stomach. "She is at the house with the nanny," Margaret replied, smoothing the edge of my blanket with a hand that never trembled. "Graham thought it best she not see you like this. Children are so sensitive to these things. Don't you think it is better she remembers her mother whole, not broken?" Graham thought it best. I knew that translation. It meant Margaret had decided. And Graham had simply nodded, his spine dissolving, like sugar in tea, as it always did when his mother spoke. I closed my eyes, picturing my 4-year-old daughter, her messy chestnut curls, and her stubborn little chin trapped in that mausoleum of a house in Bexley, while her grandmother rewrote reality. "You were just so exhausted, dear," Margaret continued, her voice dropping to a soothing, hypnotic hum. "I saw it at dinner. You were swaying even then. The doctor says head injuries can cause such terrible confusion, a sort of blurring of the edges of memory. It is only natural that you don't recall exactly how you tripped. You reached for the banister, your foot slipped, and then it happened so fast." She was looking right at me. She had stood at the top of those stairs, her face a mask of cold calculation, and she had placed her hand on my chest and pushed. Now she was leaning over me, her breath smelling of peppermint, and secrets telling me I had slipped. She was painting a masterpiece of gaslighting, and the hospital room was her canvas. "I remember you talking to me," I said, the words heavy and slow, "at the top of the stairs. I remember what you said about the firm." Margaret didn't flicker. Not a muscle in her face moved. "Of course, dear. I was asking about your headache. You said you felt dizzy. You reached for the wall, and you lost your footing. It was a tragedy, truly. We are just so lucky I was there to call for Graham." The door swished open again, and Graham walked in. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a century. His tie was loosened, his white shirt wrinkled at the elbows, his face a pale map of anxiety. He didn't come to the side of the bed. He stood behind his mother, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets, his shoulders hunched as if he were trying to hide behind her shadow. "She's awake, Mom," he said, his voice thin and hollow. "Yes," Margaret replied, not taking her eyes off me. "And she is starting to remember. We were just discussing how much of a relief it is that she's safe." Graham looked at me then, but his eyes were vacant, a stranger's eyes. "Mom feels terrible, Claire. She has been here all night. She hasn't left your side." I felt a cold shiver crawl down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He wasn't even going to ask for my version. He had already accepted the script Margaret had written for him. He was a Whitman, and in this family the story was more important than the truth. Margaret reached out and squeezed my hand, her fingers cold and dry as parchment. "Rest now," she whispered. "Everything will be fine. We are family after all." They left together, the door hissing shut behind them, leaving me in a silence that felt like a burial. The lawyer in me, the part of my brain that had spent years dissecting contracts and hunting for loopholes, started to wake up. It moved under the haze of the pain medication, a sharp, analytical ghost. "Think," I told myself. "What do you know for a fact?" I was pushed. The impact happened after the push. The crystal fragment the doctor mentioned, the one removed from my scalp, that was the key. Vases don't jump into head wounds during a simple trip and fall. What does she want? She wants the divorce. She wants Lily. She wants me gone before I can breathe a word about the lawsuit she thinks I am interfering with. She is using my medical record to build a narrative of instability. She is documenting her concern so that when the time comes, she can take my daughter and tell the world she was just being a good grandmother. And then I remembered the laptop. My old work laptop was still in my office at home. I had left Sullivan and Hayes 4 years ago, but in the chaos of my departure, they had never deactivated my remote access account. It was a security oversight that had always bothered my sense of order, but now it was a lifeline. If Margaret was accusing me of accessing files, I could find out whose IP address had actually logged in. I could find out what else they were hiding. I wasn't a lawyer anymore. I was a mother fighting for her life. But the law is a language, and I still knew how to speak it. A nurse entered a few hours later, her face a neutral mask of professional distance. She began checking the IV bag, her movements efficient and silent. "Is there a bruise on my chest?" I asked. My voice was clearer now, the lawyer's edge returning. "A handprint, perhaps?" The nurse paused, her hand hovering over the plastic tubing. She looked toward the door, then back at me, her expression flickering with a brief, sharp discomfort. "I will let the doctor know you are asking questions, Mrs. Whitman," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She didn't look me in the eye again before she hurried out. She had seen it. I could feel the truth of it in the room. There was a mark on me that didn't fit the fall, and the hospital staff knew it. Evening began to settle over Columbus, the sky outside turning a bruised purple. Dr. Nina Okafor returned, her white coat, a stark contrast to the deepening shadows. She didn't have a smile for me. She had a small evidence bag. Inside sat a single glittering triangle of glass. "Mrs. Whitman, I need to be direct with you," Dr. Okafor said, holding the bag up so the light caught the facets of the crystal. "Your mother-in-law insists on the fall, but the fracture pattern on your skull is consistent with blunt force trauma. This fragment we removed. It is heavy-leaded crystal. It came from something that shattered with significant force. The vase in the hallway," I said. "It was on the table. Physics doesn't lie. Claire," the doctor said, her voice dropping. "To have this embedded in your scalp, you would have had to hit that table with the force of a shove, not a slip. And as an attending physician, I am a mandatory reporter. I cannot ignore the discrepancy between your injuries and the story your family is telling." I felt a surge of pure, blinding terror. If she called the police, the war would be official. Margaret would stop being a worried mother-in-law and become an assassin. She would use every dollar, every connection, every brass plaque in this hospital to crush me. "She'll take Lily," I whispered. "She'll make me look crazy." Dr. Okafor set the evidence bag on the tray. "I have seen women stay silent for decades," she said. "I have seen them come back to this ER with injuries they didn't survive. The Whitman name might be on this wing, but my medical license is mine. I am going to make the call now." She walked out, her footsteps echoing in the hallway. I lay there, my heart hammering against my ribs, watching the shadows stretch across the room. Within 15 minutes, the silence of the Whitman family would be shattered, and there would be no going back. The footsteps returned sooner than I expected, not the doctor's steady gait, but the heavy, measured stride of a man in boots. A man in a suit walked in, a badge clipped to his belt. He was followed by another man, and then the sound I dreaded most. Margaret's voice, high and panicked, cutting through the hospital quiet. "Mrs. Whitman." The man with the badge asked, standing at the foot of my bed. "I am Detective Torres with the Columbus Police. We received a report of a possible domestic assault." I looked past him. Margaret was standing in the doorway, Graham hovering at her shoulder. Her face was a mask of tragic disbelief, her hands trembling as she reached for Graham's arm. "Detective, please," Margaret cried, her voice echoing in the hall. "My daughter-in-law has been so confused. The medication, the trauma to her head, she doesn't know what she is saying. We are just trying to get her the help she needs. Ma'am, I need you to step back," Detective Torres said, his voice a flat metallic wall. He turned his attention back to me. "Claire, can you tell me what happened in that hallway on Saturday night?" The silence in the room was thick, suffocating. I could see the sweat on Graham's forehead. I could see the cold, murderous promise in Margaret's eyes. Everything I had, my home, my marriage, my reputation, hung on the next 10 seconds. "She pushed me," I said. My voice didn't shake. The lawyer was back, and she was cross-examining the world. "She stood at the top of the stairs. She accused me of stealing from her company. And then she pushed me. There is a handprint on my chest where she hit me. There is crystal in my head from her vase. She pushed me." Margaret didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply let out a long, slow sigh of pity. "Detective, you see the instability we mentioned. It is heartbreaking." "Claire, stop this," Graham pleaded, his voice breaking. "Just stop." "I will need statements from everyone," Torres said, his eyes never leaving Margaret. "Starting with you, Mrs. Whitman. Let's find an empty consulting room." As they led her away, Margaret turned her head. She looked at me over her shoulder, her face shifting for just a second into a grin of pure, unadulterated malice. She wasn't afraid. She was a Whitman, and she was in her own wing. But as the door closed, I knew the first fracture had been made. And once a Whitman name starts to crack, the whole house usually follows. Tuesday came with a gray, flat sky that pressed down on the rooftops of Upper Arlington. The house smelled of lemon polish and bleach, the scent of a crime scene scrubbed clean. Graham had brought me home in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel of the Audi, driving with the careful precision of a man transporting a bomb that had already detonated. I stood in the foyer, my bag heavy on my shoulder. The runner rug in the hallway had been straightened. The table where the mail usually piled up was empty. It was my house. The mortgage bore both our names, but it felt like a museum exhibit where I had crossed the velvet rope. Graham walked past me carrying my suitcase toward the stairs. He hesitated at the bottom, his foot hovering over the first step. He didn't look up at the landing. He didn't look at the spot where the vase had been. He just stared at the wood grain, his jaw working. "I will sleep in the guest room," he said, his voice flat. "To give you space. To give me space, or to avoid looking at the bandages wrapped around my head. To avoid thinking about the handprint his mother had left on my chest, which was blooming now into a deep, ugly purple violet. The flowers were already there. A massive arrangement of white hydrangeas on the kitchen island. The card was simple. "Rest well. Love, Mom." She was marking her territory. Even here, 3 miles from the estate, I was under her surveillance. I walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My hand shook, spilling a few drops on the granite. Graham came back down, stopping in the doorway. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. "We need to talk about the investigation," he said. "There is nothing to talk about, Graham." "The detective has my statement. You are destroying this family," he said. It wasn't a shout. It was a statement of fact delivered with the weary disappointment of a parent scolding a toddler. "You are embarrassing, Mom. You are embarrassing me." The partners at the firm are already asking questions about the police presence at the hospital. I set the glass down. Hard. Water sloshed over the rim. "I didn't push myself down the stairs, Graham." "You were confused," he said, reciting the line as if he had memorized it from a script. "You were dizzy. You admitted it yourself at dinner." I looked at him, really looked at him. The gray at his temples that he was so proud of. The soft line of his jaw. I had spent 8 years trying to be the perfect wife for this man, ironing his shirts, hosting his dinners, swallowing his mother's insults like vitamins. "I know what I know," I said. He shook his head, turning away. "I can't do this, Claire. Not when you are like this." He left me there. He retreated to his study, closing the door with a definitive click. He was choosing his reality. He was choosing the version of the world where his mother was a saint and his wife was a hysterical, clumsy liability. A small noise came from the mudroom door. Lily. She stood there in her preschool t-shirt, clutching her stuffed rabbit by the ear. She looked from me to the closed study door, her big eyes wide and alert. She sensed the pressure in the air, the static electricity of an argument that hadn't quite ended. "Mommy," she whispered. "You have an ouchie." I knelt down, ignoring the sharp stab of pain in my head. I pulled her close, burying my face in the smell of her strawberry shampoo. She was warm and solid and real. She was the only thing in this house that Margaret hadn't tainted. "Mommy is okay, baby," I lied. She pulled back and touched the bandage on my forehead with a gentle, sticky finger. "Grandma said you fell down. She said you are clumsy." My blood ran cold. She was already doing it, planting the seeds, shaping the narrative in the mind of a 4-year-old. I held Lily tighter. I wasn't doing this for me anymore. If I let them write this story, Lily would grow up watching her mother fade into the wallpaper. She would learn that love meant silence. She would learn to be a victim. I couldn't trust Graham. I couldn't trust the police to fight a woman who had a hospital wing named after her husband. I had to find my own ammunition. That night, the house was a tomb. Graham had gone to bed hours ago, or at least he had turned off the light in the guest room. I sat in my home office, the glow of my laptop screen the only light in the room. I hadn't opened this computer in months. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, remembering the rhythm of research, the hunt for a precedent. I typed in the search bar, "Graham Whitman Wedding, 1998. The society pages of the Columbus Dispatch had archived everything. There they were. A black and white photo from June. Graham looked impossibly young, his smile easy and unburdened. And next to him was a girl who looked like she was made of glass. Blonde, slender, with a smile that looked more like a question than a celebration. Bethany Whitman. I scrolled through the timeline, the wedding announcements, the charity gala photos, and then 3 years later, a brief 2-line notice in the legal section. Dissolution of marriage, no fanfare, no gossip. She had simply evaporated. I switched tabs. I searched for Bethany Mercer. It took an hour. I found an art teacher in Indianapolis with the same eyes, though the smile was different now. It was guarded. She had a new last name, a new life, a husband who looked like a high school football coach, and 2 teenagers. She had survived. I looked at the time, 11:45. It was too late to call. It was crazy to call. I dialed the number I found on her school district directory. It rang 4 times. I was about to hang up, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, when the line clicked open. "Hello," a woman's voice said. It was tight, wary. "Is this Bethany Mercer?" I asked. "Formerly, Bethany Whitman." There was a silence so long I thought the call had dropped. I could hear the static, the faint sound of a television in the background. "Who is this?" she asked finally. The wariness had sharpened into fear. "My name is Claire," I said. "I am married to Graham. I need to—" I didn't know how to finish the sentence. How do you ask a stranger if your husband's family tried to kill them too? "I can't talk to you," she said. Her voice was shaking. "Please," I said. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the desk. "Please, just listen." I fell down the stairs at the Bexley house. Saturday night. Except I didn't fall. I was pushed. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't empty. It was heavy with recognition. "Did she do it herself this time?" Beth asked. Her voice was a whisper, barely audible. "Or did she make Graham do it?" The world tilted on its axis. This time. It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation. "She did it herself," I said. "Mrs. Mercer." Beth let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "Call me Beth, and I signed an NDA 20 years ago, so I legally can't tell you anything." My lawyer brain stalled. An NDA. Of course. Margaret didn't just break people. She bought the wreckage so she could bury it. "I understand," I said. "I am sorry to bother you." "Wait," Beth said. "But NDAs have expiration dates. Mine was for 20 years. It expired last spring." I stopped breathing. "I have been waiting," Beth said. "I have been waiting to see if anyone else would call." I thought maybe she had stopped. "I thought maybe you were the lucky one." I laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "I am not lucky." "Can you come to Indianapolis?" she asked. "I have things I couldn't say for 20 years, and I think you need to hear them." I kept copies, Claire. I kept copies of everything. Saturday morning, I told Graham I was going to visit a college roommate in Dayton. He didn't look up from his tablet. He just nodded, relieved to have me out of the house, relieved to have a break from the walking reminder of his own cowardice. The drive west on Interstate 70 was a blur of flat cornfields and gray asphalt. I gripped the steering wheel until my hands ached. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Margaret's black Mercedes following me, but there was only the endless stream of trucks and sedans. Beth lived in a neighborhood of ranch houses with tricycles in the driveways and basketball hoops over the garage doors. It was aggressively normal. It was the kind of life Margaret Whitman would look at with polite, sneering disdain. Beth opened the door before I could knock. She was older than the girl in the wedding photo, her face lined with the kind of character that comes from survival. She wore a paint-splattered apron and jeans. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on the bandage on my forehead. "Come in," she said. "The boys are at soccer with Dave. We have the house to ourselves." She made tea. Earl Grey. She poured it into mismatched mugs, her hands steady. We sat at her kitchen table, a piece of sunlight falling between us. "I was 24 when I married Graham," Beth said, wrapping her hands around her mug. "I was 27 when I left." "What happened?" I asked. "Margaret happened," Beth said. She looked out the window at the bird feeder. It started small. Comments about my clothes, my family. Then she started telling Graham I was depressed, that I was moody, that I was drinking too much. She isolated me, Claire. She cut me off from everyone until Graham was the only person I had left. And then she turned him against me. It was like looking in a mirror. The script hadn't changed in 20 years. And then Beth continued, her voice hardening. Then came the accident. I was pregnant, just a few weeks. We hadn't even told anyone yet. But I think she knew. She always knows. I felt the blood drain from my face. We were arguing at the top of the stairs, Beth said. About nothing. About a dinner party menu. She reached out. She just shoved me. I fell backward. I lost the baby. I covered my mouth. Graham wasn't there when it happened, she said. But when he came home, she told him I had been drinking. She told him I slipped. And he believed her. Or he pretended to. She fell down the same stairs. Same story. Same lies. She came to me in the hospital, Beth said. She brought the family lawyer. They offered me a settlement, $500,000, a quiet divorce, and an NDA that said if I ever spoke about the miscarriage or the fall, I would owe them every penny back plus damages. And you signed it. I asked. I was 27, Beth said. I was broken. I had just lost my child. I had no money, no lawyer. And she made it clear what would happen if I tried to fight. What did she say? Beth looked at me, her brown eyes fierce and sad. She said accidents happen every day. She said next time it might be a car crash or a fire. She threatened my life, Claire. So I took the money, I signed the paper, and I ran. She stood up and walked to a cabinet in the hallway. She came back with a thick manila envelope. She placed it on the table between us. "This is my copy of the medical record," she said, "from the fall and the NDA. Look at the date." I opened the folder. The paper was yellowed with age. St. Vincent's Medical Center. Admitting diagnosis, accidental fall. But further down in the nursing notes, patient alleges assault, bruising on chest inconsistent with fall mechanism. It was the same, the exact same pattern. And there is one more thing, Beth said. She tapped the table with her index finger. "Graham had a brother, Roger. He died," I said. "Heart attack, 15 years ago," Beth nodded. "Roger had a wife, Sandra. I tried to find her a few years after I left, just to warn her. But she was gone. Gone institutionalized," Beth said. "A mental breakdown, apparently, 6 months after Roger died. The family paid for a private facility, and then she just ceased to exist. I don't know if she is alive or dead. But if Margaret couldn't buy her silence, she probably found another way to ensure it." I looked at the stack of papers. This wasn't just a bad mother-in-law. This was a predator who had been hunting women for decades, using her son as the bait and her money as the trap. I touched the bandage on my head. I thought about the Ring camera footage I hadn't checked yet. I thought about the login for my old law firm. "She thinks she won," I said. "She always wins," Beth said. "Not this time," I said. I pulled the envelope toward me. "I am not 27, and I am not alone." Beth smiled then. It was a grim, sharp smile. "No," she said. "You are not. I drove back to Columbus with the envelope tucked under the passenger seat. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the highway. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a prosecutor building a case, and for the first time in 8 years, I knew exactly who I was. I was the woman who was going to burn the Whitman legacy to the ground. Monday night found me in the sanctuary of my home office, a room Graham rarely entered because it smelled of dust and unfulfilled ambition. The house was silent, wrapped in the heavy, suffocating quiet that had settled over us since I returned from the hospital. Graham was in the guest room, a closed door that spoke louder than any argument we had ever had. Lily was asleep, safe for now, in her canopy bed, dreaming of a world where grandmothers baked cookies instead of destroying lives. I sat on the floor, the Persian rug scratching against my bare legs, surrounded by the ghosts of the Whitman family. The envelope Beth had given me lay open. I spread the documents out in a semicircle, arranging them chronologically. It was a habit I hadn't broken in 4 years of domesticity. The lawyer in me was awake, stretching her limbs, hungry for the logic of evidence. I picked up the first sheet, a medical intake form from St. Vincent's Medical Center, dated October 12, 2001. Patient Bethany Whitman. Admitting physician Dr. Robert Halloway. Chief complaint: fall from stairs. I placed my own discharge papers next to it. October 14, 2023. Patient Claire Whitman. Admitting physician Dr. Nina Okafor. Chief complaint: fall from stairs. The symmetry was nauseating. I traced the line of Beth's injuries with my finger: laceration to the parietal lobe, fractured radius, contusions on the chest wall. I looked at the photos she had included, grainy Polaroids taken in a bathroom mirror. The bruise on her chest was a dark, blooming violet shaped like a shadow. It was in the exact same spot where my own chest now ached, a phantom handprint that hadn't yet faded. Margaret didn't just have a method. She had a signature. I picked up the NDA. It was a standard confidentiality agreement, the kind corporations use to protect trade secrets, but repurposed for domestic erasure. The undersigned agrees to maintain strict confidentiality regarding all personal matters of the Whitman family in exchange for a settlement sum of $500,000. $500,000. The price of a life. The price of a silence that had lasted 2 decades. I leaned back against the desk leg, rubbing my temples. The headache was a constant companion now, a dull throb that spiked whenever I tried to focus too hard. But I couldn't stop. The pattern was incomplete. Beth had mentioned a third woman, Roger's wife, Sandra. I turned to my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the darkness, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. I navigated to the Columbus Dispatch archives again, searching for Roger Whitman. His obituary was a masterpiece of revisionist history. Beloved husband, father, and philanthropist. Passed away suddenly of cardiac arrest. There was a photo of him, a heavier, softer version of Graham, standing next to a woman who looked like she was trying to disappear into her own coat. Sandra Whitman. I searched for her name. The results were sparse. A wedding announcement in 1995. A few mentions in society columns attending galas. And then 6 months after Roger's death in 2008, a single line in a probate court filing. Sandra Whitman incapacitated. Incapacitated. It was a legal term that could mean anything from a coma to a court-ordered guardianship. I used my old Sullivan and Hayes login. The firm had a subscription to a massive legal database that tracked court filings across the state. My heart hammered as I typed in the password, half expecting the screen to flash red, denying me access. Margaret had accused me of using it of stealing files, but that had been a lie to cover her own tracks. Now I was making it the truth. The login worked. I typed Sandra Whitman, probate Franklin County. The file appeared. A petition for guardianship filed by Margaret Elise Whitman. The reason cited was severe mental instability and inability to care for self. The petition was granted. Sandra had been stripped of her autonomy, her finances, and her voice in a single afternoon. But where was she? I scrolled through the billing records attached to the guardianship annual reports. Most were redacted, black bars hiding the flow of money. But in 2010, a clerk had slipped up. One line remained visible. Payment to Pineview Behavioral Health Center, $12,000. Pineview. It wasn't a hospital. It was a warehouse for the inconvenient wealthy, tucked away in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania. I sat back, the cold light of the screen illuminating the devastation on the floor. 3 women. Beth paid off and exiled. Sandra locked away and erased. And me. I was the third. And if I didn't finish this, I would be the last. Wednesday morning, the sky was the color of a wet sidewalk. I drove to a coffee shop on the north side of town, far from the manicured streets of Bexley. It was a place with mismatched chairs and coffee that tasted like burnt nuts, the kind of place Margaret Whitman would never set foot in. Detective Torres was already there. He sat at a corner table, his back to the wall, watching the door. He wasn't wearing his suit. In a flannel shirt and jeans, he looked older, the lines around his eyes etched deeper by sleepless nights. He didn't smile when I sat down. He just pushed a cup of black coffee toward me. "You shouldn't be here, Mrs. Whitman," he said. His voice was low, barely carrying over the sound of the espresso machine. "Claire," I said, "please. And I assume you are here because you haven't closed the case yet." Torres sighed, running a hand over his face. He looked tired, a bone-deep exhaustion that came from fighting battles he wasn't allowed to win. "The captain called me into his office yesterday," he said. "He asked why I was still pulling records on an accidental fall. He said the family is threatening a harassment suit. He said if I don't wrap this up by Friday, I'm back on patrol." I felt a spike of fear. Without Torres, I had no access to the legal system. I was just a paranoid housewife with a theory. "They are scared," I said. "That means we are getting close. It means they have friends in the mayor's office, Claire." Torres leaned in, his dark eyes intense. "Look, I believe you. I saw the fear in your eyes that night. I saw the way your mother-in-law looked at you, like you were a stain on her carpet. But belief isn't evidence. Unless you have something new, I can't keep this open." I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder Beth had given me. I slid it across the table. "Open it." Torres hesitated, then flipped the cover. He stared at the photos of Beth's injuries. He read the medical report. He looked at the date, 2001, he whispered. "Her name is Bethany Mercer," I said. "She was Graham's first wife. She fell down the same stairs. She had the same bruising on her chest, and Margaret paid her $500,000 to never say a word." Torres flipped through the pages, his speed increasing. He stopped at the NDA. He traced the signature with his thumb. "This is a pattern," he said. "It wasn't a question. It is a playbook I corrected. And there is a third one. Sandra Whitman, Roger's wife. She disappeared in 2008. I found records showing Margaret filed for guardianship. She shipped her off to a facility in Pennsylvania called Pineview." Torres looked up. His expression had changed. The weariness was gone, replaced by the sharp, cold focus of a hunter who has just caught a scent. "Kidnapping," he murmured. "Fraud. Assault. If we can prove she orchestrated this—" "Can you verify Sandra's location?" I asked. Without tipping off Margaret, Torres nodded slowly. "I have a buddy in the Pennsylvania State Police. I can have him run a welfare check. Quietly." "But Claire, this is dangerous. If she knows we are digging up bodies—" "She already knows I am a problem," I said. I touched the bandage on my head. "She tried to solve me. I am just trying to make sure the solution doesn't stick." Torres closed the folder. He put his hand on top of it, a protective gesture. "I have a sister," he said suddenly. He didn't look at me. He looked at his coffee. "Her name is Elena. She was married to a guy who was a pillar of the community. Everyone loved him, but inside the house—" He trailed off. He didn't need to finish. I knew the silence that lived inside those houses. "It took her 6 years to get out," Torres said. "She almost didn't make it. The cops wouldn't listen. They said it was a domestic dispute. They said he was a good man." He looked up, meeting my eyes. "I will make the call to Pennsylvania," he said. "And I will keep the file open. But we have to move fast. If they shut me down, this evidence disappears into an evidence locker and never sees the light of day." Friday. I was working against a clock I couldn't see. Graham was becoming more distant, his silence morphing into a sullen hostility. He spent long hours at the office, or at his mother's estate, managing the crisis, as he called it. I knew what that meant. They were circling the wagons. I drove the rental car I had picked up that morning, leaving my SUV in the garage. I didn't want the GPS tracker to ping my location. I headed east, crossing the state line into Pennsylvania, the landscape shifting from flat Ohio cornfields to rolling wooded hills. Pineview Behavioral Health Center sat at the end of a long, winding driveway lined with ancient oaks. It looked less like a hospital and more like a country club for the damned. The building was brick-covered in ivy with manicured lawns where patients walked in slow, medicated circles. I parked in the visitor lot. I had no appointment. I had no authority. All I had was a lie and a prayer. I walked up to the reception desk. The lobby smelled of potpourri and despair. A woman with glasses on a chain around her neck sat behind a high counter, typing on a computer. "Can I help you?" she asked, not looking up. "I hope so," I said, channeling my best corporate counsel voice. Confident, entitled, a little bored. "I am here to see my aunt, Sandra Whitman." The typing stopped. The woman looked up, her eyes narrowed behind her lenses. "We don't have a patient by that name," she said. The denial came too fast. It was a reflex. "Please," I said, leaning in. "I drove 3 hours. Margaret sent me. She wanted me to check on the arrangements." I threw the name out like a grenade. "Margaret." The receptionist flinched. It was subtle, a tightening of the mouth, but I saw it. She glanced down at her screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Mrs. Whitman handles all visitation personally," the woman said. Her voice was icy, and she didn't mention a niece. I forced a laugh. It sounded harsh in the quiet lobby. "You know Margaret. She delegates when she is busy. And with the gala coming up," I watched the woman's eyes. They darted to the left toward a set of double doors, marked East Wing, restricted. It was a micro-expression, a tell. Sandra was back there. "I am sorry," the woman said, standing up. "I cannot confirm or deny the presence of any patient. You need to leave or I will call security." I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I had what I came for. I turned and walked toward the exit, listening to the receptionist pick up the phone behind me. "Security to the front desk," she hissed into the receiver. I walked out into the cool Pennsylvania air. I didn't go to my car. I walked around the side of the building, keeping to the shadows of the oak trees. The East Wing was a separate structure connected by a glass walkway. The windows were high and narrow. I found a bench near a garden where a group of patients sat. They were older, mostly wrapped in shawls, staring at nothing. And then I saw her. She was sitting in a wheelchair, her back to me. But I recognized the coat. It was a heavy wool coat, expensive, but out of fashion, the kind you wear when you stop caring what year it is. A nurse walked over to her. "Mrs. Whitman, it is time for your meds." The woman in the chair turned her head. It was the face from the obituary, but eroded by 15 years of silence. Her hair was white and thin. Her skin was papery, but her eyes were sharp. They were burning with a cold, hard fire that the medication hadn't extinguished. "Sandra." I couldn't get to her. There was a fence and a keycard lock and security guards starting to patrol the perimeter. But I had seen her. She wasn't a ghost. She was alive. I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo through the chain-link fence. It was blurry, but it was proof. I hurried back to the car as a security vehicle rolled into the lot. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped my keys. I scooped them up, jammed them into the ignition, and peeled out of the lot. I had the third victim. I had the pattern. I had the detective. But as I drove back toward the highway, my phone buzzed. A text from Graham. "Mom is coming over for dinner tonight. Be home." It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. Margaret knew I was moving. She could feel the web trembling, and tonight she was coming to tighten the strands. Monday arrived with the heavy, humid heat that sometimes clings to Ohio in the early autumn, a stubborn refusal to let go of summer. I sat in my home office, the door locked, the blinds drawn against the afternoon sun. My desk, usually a dumping ground for unopened mail, and Lily's coloring books, had been transformed. It was no longer a piece of domestic furniture. It was a war room. I laid the documents out in a fan shape, a habit from my days at Sullivan and Hayes. Exhibit A was Beth's medical records from 2001. Exhibit B was the blurry photograph I had taken of Sandra at the facility in Pennsylvania. Exhibit C was my own discharge summary, the paper crisp and white, the diagnosis of skull fracture staring up at me like an accusation. I spent the morning cross-referencing dates. Graham's brother Roger had died in 2008. His wife Sandra was institutionalized 6 months later. Graham divorced Beth in 2001, 3 months after her fall. The timeline wasn't just a sequence of events. It was a rhythmic, bloody heartbeat that pulsed through the history of the Whitman family. I picked up a pen, twirling it between my fingers until the plastic bit into my skin. I wasn't just connecting dots anymore. I was building a case theory. Criminal charges were a long shot. The statute of limitations on Beth's assault had expired a decade ago. Sandra was legally under Margaret's guardianship, a status signed off by a judge, who probably played golf with Harold Whitman. In my case, it was my word against the matriarch of Bexley, and I had no witnesses, but civil court, custody court. That was a different arena. If I could prove a pattern of behavior, a systematic dismantling of the women who married into this family, I could prove that Margaret was a danger to Lily. I didn't need to put her in prison to win. I just needed to strip her of the one thing she valued more than her money, her control. I looked at the empty spot on the desk. I had the history. I had the victims. What I lacked was the smoking gun for my own assault. The crystal fragment in Dr. Okafor's evidence locker was damning, but a good defense attorney would argue accidental impact. They would say I fell into the table. They would say I was clumsy. I needed something that spoke. Tuesday evening, the house was quiet. Graham was still at the office, or claiming to be. I sat on the living room sofa, my laptop burning my thighs. I had been so focused on the medical evidence on the paper trail of the past that I had ignored the digital footprint of the present. The Ring app. I opened it on my browser. The timeline scrolled back a series of mundane thumbnails. The mail carrier, a delivery truck, Lily and the nanny returning from the park. I scrolled back to the days I was in the hospital. Saturday night, Sunday, Monday. There it was, Monday afternoon, 2:53 p.m. The thumbnail showed Margaret's black Mercedes pulling into the driveway. She didn't park on the street. She parked right in front of the garage, claiming the space as if she owned the asphalt. I clicked play. The video was grainy, the fisheye lens distorting the edges of the frame, but the audio was crisp. Margaret walked up the path. She wasn't wearing her usual public mask of benevolent grace. Her face was tight, her mouth a thin, hard line. She didn't ring the bell. She used a key. My breath hitched. I didn't know she had a key. A moment later, the camera caught Graham following her. He looked wretched, his shoulders slumped, his tie loose. He looked like a man marching to the gallows. I turned up the volume. The camera was mounted by the front door, but the microphone was sensitive enough to pick up their voices as they stood in the open doorway. "She needs to stop talking to that detective," Margaret said. Her voice was low, vibrating with a cold fury I had only ever seen directed at waitstaff who got her order wrong. "I am trying," Mom Graham said. He sounded exhausted. "She won't listen. She is asking questions about the login, about the files." "Make her listen," Margaret snapped. "Or I will." Graham flinched. "You should have done it properly the first time." The air left my lungs. I pressed pause. My hand was shaking so hard the laptop wobbled on my knees. Properly, as if my assault had been a botched administrative task. As if he was critiquing a sloppy spreadsheet. I pressed play again. "I didn't do anything," Graham whined. "She fell. That is what we agreed. She fell because I pushed her." "Graham," Margaret said. Her voice didn't waver. "Keep up." And then she laughed. It was a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "Just like Beth fell. Just like Sandra fell. They all fall eventually." I stared at the screen. I knew about the pattern. Beth had told me. I had seen the records. But hearing the casual board admission of 3 generations of violence, it felt like the floor had dropped out from under me all over again. They all fall eventually. She spoke about us like we were dominoes, like we were inevitable casualties of her existence. But it was Graham's next words that shattered what little was left of my heart. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "The same thing we always do," Margaret said, stepping into my house, her heels clicking on my foyer tile. "Discredit her. Document her instability. I have already spoken to Dr. Evans about her postpartum mood swings. We build the file. And if she doesn't stop—" She paused, turning back to face him, her face filling the frame. "We may need to discuss Lily's custody." Graham shifted his weight. "You mean take Lily from her?" "I mean protect that child from an unstable mother," Margaret said. "It is what any good grandmother would do." The video cut off as the door slammed shut. I sat in the silence of my living room, the tinny echo of their voices still bouncing around my skull. I felt sick, a physical nausea that roiled in my gut. Graham knew. He hadn't just looked away. He had facilitated. He had opened the door. He had agreed to the narrative. She fell because I pushed her. I replayed those 6 words. I closed my eyes and listened to the cadence of her voice. It was a confession. It was the truth, naked and ugly. But the lawyer in me was already awake, pouring cold water on the fire of my emotions. Ohio is a one-party consent state. That means you can record a conversation without a warrant as long as one person in the conversation consents to the recording. I wasn't in the conversation. I wasn't in the house. Neither Graham nor Margaret knew they were being recorded. I ran the statutes through my mind. wiretapping laws, expectation of privacy. In a criminal court, a good defense attorney would move to suppress this immediately. They would argue it was an illegal intercept. It would never be heard by a jury. It would be buried in a pretrial motion, inadmissible and useless. I opened my eyes. The screen was dark now, reflecting my own face. Pale, bandaged, furious. A courtroom wasn't the only place judgments were rendered. I downloaded the file. I saved it to my hard drive, then to a cloud server, then to a thumb drive. I hid inside a box of tampons, in the bathroom cabinet. It might not send her to prison, but if the right people heard it, if the society matrons and the hospital donors and the city council members heard Margaret Whitman admit to pushing women downstairs, it would destroy her. It would take the one thing the law couldn't touch: her name. Wednesday morning brought a knock at the door that sounded like a gavel. I was in the kitchen pretending to drink coffee, pretending I wasn't plotting the destruction of my husband's family. I froze. I hadn't invited anyone. The Ring app hadn't alerted me, which meant the visitor had bypassed the front door and come to the side entrance the one family used. I closed my laptop. I walked to the door and opened it. Margaret stood on the step. She wore a camel hair coat and a silk scarf tied with geometric precision. She didn't wait for an invitation. She simply stepped forward, forcing me to retreat or be trampled. "May I come in?" she asked, already crossing the threshold. I stepped back, my hand gripping the doorknob until my knuckles turned white. I didn't say yes. I let the silence hang there, a small, petty resistance. "I have been worried about you, Claire," she said, pulling off her leather gloves finger by finger. She looked around the kitchen, her eyes landing on the stack of unwashed dishes in the sink. The judgment was instantaneous and silent. "Graham says you have been distracted," she said. "He says you are spending a lot of time in your office, working on something." "Just catching up on reading," I said. My voice was steady. It surprised me. "Reading," Margaret repeated. She placed her gloves on the granite island right next to Lily's sippy cup. "You were always so smart. That is what worried me about you, from the beginning. Smart women are dangerous. They think too much. They imagine things that aren't there." She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the refrigerator, at a drawing Lily had made. A stick figure family. Mommy, Daddy, Lily. No grandmother. "I imagine you are here for a reason, Margaret," I said. She turned then, her blue eyes locking onto mine. There was no warmth in them, no pretense of affection. "I have been thinking about Lily," she said softly, "about her future. She deserves stability, Claire. A mother who can be present, not one who is chasing shadows." "I am very present. For now," Margaret said. She walked over to the fridge and traced the outline of the stick figure mommy with a manicured nail. "But children need consistency. And with your history of confusion since the accident, well, I would hate to see her caught in the middle of something unpleasant." It was a threat wrapped in velvet. She was telling me she would take my child. She would use the doctors, the lawyers, the money, the influence. She would paint me as the hysterical, brain-damaged outsider, and she would take Lily to the estate and mold her into another perfect Whitman doll. She didn't know I had the tape. She didn't know I had heard her confess to the same strategy she used on Beth. She thought she was looking at a victim. She thought she was looking at a broken woman who was holding on by a thread. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. It was the feeling of holding a royal flush while your opponent bet the deed to their house. "I am sure everything will be fine, Margaret," I said. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a woman who knows where the bodies are buried. "We are family after all, and family protects family. Isn't that what you always say?" Margaret went still. Her finger stopped on the drawing. She turned her head slowly, looking at me with a new expression. It wasn't fear, not yet, but it was doubt. It was the first hairline fracture in her certainty. She blinked. Once, twice. "I will see myself out," she said. Her voice was clipped. She grabbed her gloves, missing the smooth, practiced grace she usually possessed. She didn't look back as she walked to the door. I locked it behind her. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood and let out a breath that shook my entire body. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. I had the video, I had the pattern, And for the first time in 8 years, I had made Margaret Whitman blink. Friday morning arrived with a deceptive fragile peace. The sun filtered through the kitchen window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, oblivious to the fact that my life was about to be dismantled. I was pouring coffee, the dark liquid swirling into a white mug, when 3 sharp raps on the front door shattered the silence. It wasn't the rhythmic knock of a neighbor or the casual thud of a delivery driver. It was precise, authoritative. I walked to the door, my bare feet cold on the hardwood. Through the peephole, I saw a man I didn't recognize. He wore a windbreaker and held a thick manila envelope. I opened the door, just enough to see his face. "Claire Whitman," he asked. He didn't smile. "Yes." He thrust the envelope through the crack. "You have been served." He turned and walked away before I could even grip the paper. I closed the door, locking it automatically, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I carried the envelope to the kitchen island as if it were an explosive device. The return address was a law firm downtown, Voorhees, Stoddard and Klein, the Whitman family firm, the firm that handled mergers, acquisitions, and evidently the disposal of inconvenient wives. I tore open the tab. The documents inside were thick, printed on heavy bond paper. Emergency petition for modification of custody. Ex parte order. I read the words, but my brain refused to process them. They were legal terms I had used 1,000 times in my career, but seeing them attached to my name, to my daughter's name, felt like reading an autopsy report while I was still breathing. Petitioner alleges that respondent Claire Elizabeth Whitman has exhibited signs of severe mental instability following a traumatic brain injury. Respondent has made paranoid and unfounded accusations of violence against respected community members. Petitioner requests immediate temporary custody of the minor child Lily Whitman be granted to the father Graham Whitman pending a full psychological evaluation of the mother. My hands started to shake. The paper rattled in the quiet kitchen. How did she know the hospital records? The confusion she kept mentioning to the nurses. The way she hovered while I was on medication. She hadn't just been managing appearances. She had been building a dossier. She had been documenting my destruction before I even knew I was under attack. I flipped to the signature page. The judge's signature was a scrawl of black ink at the bottom. The Honorable Judge Warren. I laughed a dry choking sound. Judge Warren, I had seen him at the club last Christmas. He sat at Margaret's table. He was her bridge partner on Tuesdays. The system wasn't just rigged, it was owned. I spent the rest of the day pacing the house, the envelope sitting on the counter like a tombstone. I called Graham, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I called the firm, but his assistant told me he was in meetings all day. He wasn't in meetings, he was hiding. He came home at 8 o'clock. The house was dark save for the single lamp I had left on in the living room. Lily was at a sleepover with her preschool best friend, a small mercy I had arranged days ago. Thank God she wasn't here to see this. Graham walked in loosening his tie. He looked tired, his face drawn and gray, but there was a set to his jaw I hadn't seen before. He saw the envelope on the counter. He didn't look surprised. "Did you know I asked?" My voice was quiet in the empty house. He set his briefcase down. He didn't look at me. He walked to the liquor cabinet and poured himself a scotch. The ice clinked against the glass loud and sharp. "It is just a precaution, Claire." "A precaution," I repeated. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. "Your mother is filing an emergency motion to take my daughter away from me. She is trying to have me declared insane. She is trying to protect," Lily, Graham said. He took a long drink, finally turning to face me. From whatever this is. "You are obsessed, Claire. You are seeing conspiracies everywhere. You are harassing my mother." "I harassed her. She came to my house. She threatened me. She is worried about you. We both are." I looked at him, really looked at him. This man I had shared a bed with for 8 years, the father of my child. He stood there in his expensive suit, holding his expensive scotch, and he lied to my face with the ease of a man who had practiced it in the mirror. "What happened on those stairs, Graham?" I asked. "You fell," he said immediately. "Your mother said she pushed me," I said. I watched his eyes. "On our Ring camera, Monday afternoon, you were standing right there." The silence that stretched between us was thick enough to choke on. Graham froze the glass halfway to his mouth. For a second, just a fraction of a second, I saw the panic flare behind his eyes. "I have the footage, Graham. I have the audio. She fell because I pushed her." He lowered the glass slowly. He set it on the coaster. He took a breath, and when he spoke, his voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. She was speaking hypothetically, he said. I stared at him. Hypothetically? They all fall eventually? That is hypothetical to you? You are twisting her words, he said, his voice rising, gaining strength from the lie. You are taking a moment of frustration, a moment where she was trying to make sense of your accident and you are turning it into something sick. This is exactly why we need the evaluation, Claire. You are losing your grip on reality. I felt a coldness spread through my chest, extinguishing the anger, leaving only a hard crystal clarity. I watched something die behind his eyes in that moment. It wasn't surprise, it wasn't horror, it was resignation. He knew, he had always known. He knew about Beth, he knew about Sandra, he knew about me. And he had married me anyway, knowing exactly what his mother was capable of knowing, that one day I would be the one at the bottom of the stairs. Stop this, Graham said. He walked toward me, his hand outstretched. Delete that video. Sign the divorce papers Mom's lawyers are drawing up. We can handle this quietly. And if I don't, I asked, he stopped. He looked down at me, his face a mask of pity and disdain. Then my mother will make sure you never see Lily again. The threat hung in the air, absolute and final. He wasn't protecting me. He wasn't protecting Lily. He was protecting the only thing that mattered to a Whitman, the name. I turned and walked out of the room. I locked the bedroom door and shoved a chair under the handle. I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to the silence of the house, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped on Saturday morning. I was at a coffee shop 3 towns over, huddled in a booth in the back, my phone pressed to my ear. I needed neutral ground. I needed to hear a voice that wasn't trying to gaslight me. Detective Torres, I said when he answered. Claire, he said. His voice was tight-clipped. Do not call me on this line again. What happened? Someone told Margaret's lawyers about the investigation, he said. Who, I don't know. Maybe a clerk. Maybe someone in records. It doesn't matter. They filed a formal complaint against me this morning. Harassment, abuse of authority, conducting an unauthorized investigation into a closed case. My stomach dropped. Torres was my only tether to the legal system. Without him, the evidence from Pennsylvania was just hearsay. Are you off the case? I am suspended, Claire. Pending internal review. I had to turn in my badge an hour ago. I gripped the phone until my fingers ached. I am sorry, Ray. I am so sorry. Don't apologize, he said roughly. Just listen to me. They are closing ranks. The captain, the DA, the family court judges. Margaret has friends everywhere. If you try to fight this in court right now, she will bury you. She will bury the evidence. What do I do? You need to go public, he said. Soon, before she buries this completely. You need to make so much noise that they can't sweep it under the rug. Public with what platform she owns the newspapers. The local news director goes to her book club. Then find a platform she doesn't own, Torres said. Find a way to make them look. Because once the spotlight is on her, the roaches will scatter. But until then, you are on your own, Claire. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time staring at the dregs of my cold coffee. Suspended. My detective was benched. My husband had turned. The judge was a bridge partner. The system I had believed in, the law I had dedicated my life to, was nothing more than a tool for people like Margaret to beat the rest of us into submission. I drove home slowly. The house looked different when I pulled into the driveway. It didn't look like a home anymore. It looked like a trap. Sunday evening brought the end. Graham had been gone all day, likely at the estate, strategizing with Margaret. When he came home, the sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the living room floor. Lily was asleep upstairs. I had picked her up from her friend's house that afternoon, clinging to her, smelling her hair, memorizing the weight of her in my arms. I was sitting in the armchair by the window when Graham entered. He looked different. The hesitation was gone. The guilt that usually softened his features had hardened into something brittle and sharp. He carried a leather portfolio. He didn't say hello. He walked to the coffee table and set the portfolio down. I am filing for divorce tomorrow, he said. I looked at him. I didn't blink. I know. My mother's lawyers have everything prepared. He continued, his voice void of emotion. We are offering you a choice, Claire. And frankly, it is more generous than you deserve. He opened the portfolio. He laid 2 documents on the table. Option 1, he said, tapping the left document. We file for divorce citing irreconcilable differences. You sign a custody agreement giving me primary physical custody. You get supervised visitation every other weekend. You get a monthly stipend for 2 years, and you sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding all family matters. Supervised, I whispered, like a criminal, like a danger. Option 2, he said, moving his hand to the right document. We proceed with the emergency petition. We submit the medical records. We submit affidavits from family friends regarding your erratic behavior. We have you declared unfit. You lose custody entirely. You get nothing. And we will sue you for defamation regarding the accusations you have made against my mother. I looked at the papers. They were neat, orderly, professional. They were the paperwork of an execution. Why are you doing this? I asked. The question felt small in the room. He looked at me then and his face twisted, not with sadness, with annoyance. Because I am a Whitman, he said. It was so simple. It was the only truth that mattered. And you are not, he said. You never were. You were a mistake, Claire. A lapse in judgment. Mom was right. You never fit. You never understood how this family works. I understood, I said, standing up. I understood perfectly. It works on blood. It works on silence. I am the mother of your child, Graham. And my mother is the grandmother, he shot back. Lily will be fine. Better probably. She will be raised in a stable environment. She will be raised to be strong, not whatever this is. He gestured at me, at my bandaged head, at my shaking hands. You should have just stayed quiet, Claire. That is all you ever had to do. Just be grateful. Just be sound, stayed quiet. Like Beth, like Sandra, like the women in the portraits who never smiled. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the sound of a lock clicking open. The fear that had been strangling me for weeks, for years, suddenly evaporated. Get out, I said. Graham blinked. Excuse me, get out of this room, I said. My voice was low, steady. I need to think. This is my house, Claire. Get out! The scream tore from my throat, raw and primal. Graham stepped back, startled. He looked at me, at the wildness in my eyes, and for the first time that night, he looked unsure. You have until morning, he said, straightening his jacket, to decide which life you want to lose. He turned and walked out, heading for the guest room. I stood there in the darkening room, the papers on the table gleaming white in the gloom. I was at rock bottom. I had no husband, no home, no detective, no lawyer who would take my case against the Whitmans. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The streetlights were flickering on, illuminating the perfect lawns, the perfect houses, the perfect lies. I had lost everything. But as I looked at my reflection in the dark glass, I realized something. I still had the truth. I still had the video. I still had the crystal shard. I still had the medical records from 3 decades of violence. Graham thought he had stripped me of my weapons. He thought taking away his name and his money left me defenseless. He was wrong. I turned away from the window and looked up at the ceiling, toward the room where my daughter slept. I wasn't going to sign the papers. I wasn't going to disappear. I was going to war. Monday morning was a bruise on the sky, a deep purplish gray that promised rain, but delivered only a suffocating humidity. The house was silent. Graham had left hours ago, presumably, to finalize the paperwork that would erase me from my daughter's life. I sat on the edge of the bed, in the guest room, surrounded by open suitcases. I was packing. It was the logic of a defeated woman. If I fought them in court, they would drag out my medical records. They would parade doctors who had been paid to call me unstable. They would paint me as a danger, and a judge, who played bridge with Margaret, would nod and sign the order. I would lose Lily completely. But if I signed, if I took the deal, I would get supervised visitation. I would be a weekend mother. I would be a visitor in my daughter's life, monitored by social workers on Margaret's payroll, but I would still be there. I could still see her. I could still touch her. It was a coward's bargain. But I was tired. My head throbbed with a relentless pressure where the crystal had cut me. I looked at the empty space in the suitcase where my winter coat should go. I felt hollowed out, scraped clean of the fire that had driven me to Pennsylvania. I picked up a shirt, folding it mechanically. Just sign the papers, Claire. Just survive. The door creaked. I froze, my hands clutching the fabric. Lily stood in the doorway. She was wearing her favorite pajamas, the ones with the astronauts, and clutching her stuffed rabbit by its battered ear. Her hair was messy from sleep, standing up in a halo of static. "Mommy," she whispered, "why are you putting your clothes in the box?" I forced a smile. It felt like cracking plaster. "I am just organizing, baby." She walked into the room, her bare feet silent on the carpet. She climbed onto the bed next to me, ignoring the open suitcase. She leaned her head against my arm. She smelled of sleep and strawberry shampoo, the scent of my entire world. Daddy said things are changing, she said. Her voice was small. What else did Daddy say? He said I might stay at Grandma's house more. My stomach twisted. And how do you feel about that? Lily picked at a loose thread on the quilt. She didn't look at me. She looked at her rabbit. I don't like it there, she said. Why not, sweetie? Grandma has the big garden. And the pool. She is nice to me when Daddy is looking, Lily said. But when he leaves the room, she stopped smiling. She looks at me weird. I went still. Cold dread washed over me, sharper and more terrifying than the moment Margaret pushed me. Weird how Lily, like I am doing it wrong, she whispered. Like I am messy. She grabs my arm hard when I spill things. She grabbed her arm. I looked at my daughter. She was 4 years old. She was innocent. She was perfect. And Margaret was already starting. The criticism, the physical corrections, the cold, silent judgment that stripped away your soul layer by layer until you were nothing but a reflection of her expectations. I had thought I could save Lily by signing the papers. I thought staying in the margins of her life would be enough to protect her. I was wrong. If I left, I was leaving her alone with the wolf. I was handing her over to be molded, broken, and remade in Margaret's image. Or worse, one day, Lily would be 24. One day, she would make a mistake. One day, she might find herself at the top of a staircase. I looked at the suitcase. I looked at the surrender I had packed inside it. I reached out and pulled the clothes from the bag. I threw them on the floor. Mommy Lily asked, her eyes wide. What are you doing? I am staying, I said. I pulled her into my lap, burying my face in her neck. I am not going anywhere, Lily. I promise. I spent the morning unpacking. Every shirt I hung back in the closet was a declaration of war. When the phone rang in the afternoon, I didn't flinch. I answered it on the first ring. Claire Beth's voice was breathless, crackling with static. I found her, my hand tightened on the counter. Sandra. She is in a care facility in Pennsylvania. Just like you thought. But Claire? She is functional. She is coherent. I managed to get a message to her through a nurse who doesn't like the administration. Sandra called me 10 minutes ago from a burner phone the nurse smuggled in. Is she willing to talk? I asked. She is willing to scream, Beth said. She has been locked away for 15 years. She missed her son's graduation. She missed her life. She said she has been waiting for someone to come for her. I closed my eyes. 3 women, 3 decades, 1 monster. We have the victims, Beth said. We have the medical records. We have your video, but we need a venue. We can't go to the police again. Margaret shut down your detective. She will shut down anyone else we try to bring this to. She controls the system, I said. Not the whole system, Beth said. What is happening this weekend? I frowned, thinking. It is October, the hospital gala, the Harold Whitman Memorial Gala, Beth said, at the St. Vincent's Medical Center, in the wing named after her husband. Yes, who goes to that? Everyone, I said. The mayor, the city council, the board of directors, the press. Every wealthy donor in Columbus who wants to be seen shaking Margaret's hand. Beth's voice dropped. I am suggesting we give Margaret the audience she has always wanted. I stood there in my kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear, and I felt the lawyer inside me snap into focus. It was a terrifying idea. It was theatrical. It was dangerous. It was perfect. Beth, I said, pacing the length of the island, I need to be clear about something. The ring footage. I have been thinking about the legal angle. What about it? It is inadmissible, I said. Ohio is a one-party consent state, but that applies to parties within the conversation. I wasn't there. Recording people in a private residence when you are not present, a judge would throw it out. A defense attorney would call it illegal wiretapping. We can't use it to prosecute her. Beth was silent for a moment. So it is useless, no, I said. It is useless in a court of law. But the gala isn't a courtroom. It is a stage. I stopped pacing. I looked out the window at the manicured lawn. Public opinion doesn't follow the rules of evidence, I said. Social consequences don't require proof beyond a reasonable doubt. If 200 of the most powerful people in Columbus hear Margaret Whitman confess in her own voice, if they hear her laugh about pushing us, her reputation is dead, Beth said. And for a narcissist, that is worse than prison. Exactly. This isn't about putting her in a cell. Not yet. It is about taking away her power. It is about stripping her of the protection that money buys. Once she is exposed, once the shame is public, the police won't be able to look away. The DA won't be able to bury it. I can bring Sandra, Beth said. We can be there by Friday. I took a deep breath. For 8 years, I had pretended to be just a mother, just a wife. I had made myself small to fit into their frame. But lawyers don't forget how to build a case. We just wait for the right one. I need you and Sandra in Columbus, I said. We will be there. What else do you need? I looked at the reflection of my bandaged head in the microwave door. I looked like a victim. That had to change. I need everything you have, I said. The photos, the records, and I need a really good dress. The rest of the week was a blur of logistics. I moved through the days with a cold mechanical precision. I didn't argue with Graham. I didn't engage with his lawyers. I let them think I was paralyzed by fear. I met Beth and Sandra at a motel on the outskirts of town on Friday night. Seeing them together was like looking at a timeline of my own potential future. Beth was the middle chapter scarred but standing. Sandra was the end game. Sandra sat in a wheelchair, though she said she could walk short distances. She looked frail, her skin pale from years of institutional fluorescent light. But her eyes were sharp. They burned with a cold, hard fire. She took 15 years of my life, Sandra said. Her voice was raspy, unused. She doesn't get to take anyone else's. I laid the evidence out on the motel bed. The medical files, the NDA, the thumb drive with the video, and the crystal. I held up the small evidence bag Dr. Okafor had given me before the police arrived. The jagged triangle of Waterford crystal caught the dim light of the motel lamp. This is the key, I said. Beth leaned in. It is just glass. It is proof of physics, I said. I pulled up a photo on my tablet. It was a scanned image from a family album I had found in the attic. Christmas 2005. The hallway table was visible in the background. The massive Waterford vase sat in the center. Dr. Okafor removed this shard from my scalp, I said. The composition matches. But look where the vase is. It is heavy, stable. If I had tripped and fallen down the stairs, I would have fallen away from the table. Gravity would have pulled me down. So, how did the glass get in your head? Sandra asked. I touched the bandage. Either she smashed it over my head before I fell, or she shoved me into the table with enough force to shatter thick crystal before I went over the railing. Either way, it disproves the accidental fall theory. You don't get glass embedded in your skull from slipping on a carpet. This connects us, Beth said softly. The stairs, the lies, the injuries. I looked at the two women, my predecessors, my mirrors, my army. We were 3 generations of Whitman wives, discarded and broken, gathered in a cheap motel room to plan an execution. Tomorrow night, Margaret would stand on a stage named after her husband. She would accept applause. She would talk about family values. She would perform the role she had perfected over 40 years. And we would be there to bring the curtain down. I packed the evidence into my bag. I looked at Beth, then at Sandra. Are you ready? I asked. Sandra gripped the arms of her wheelchair. Her knuckles were white. I have been ready for 15 years, she said. I nodded. I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was the calm of the courtroom right before the opening statement. The calm of knowing you have the truth and the other side only has lies. Let's end this, I said. Saturday evening draped over Columbus like a heavy velvet curtain. The St. Vincent Medical Center was usually a place of hushed tones and antiseptic smells. But tonight, the Harold Whitman Memorial Wing vibrated with the low hum of string quartets and the clinking of crystal. I stood at the entrance of the ballroom, clutching a beaded clutch that held my phone. I wasn't wearing the beige or gray tones Margaret had dictated for 8 years. I was wearing red. A deep crimson red that looked like a fresh wound or a warning flag depending on the lighting. The room was a sea of tuxedos and gowns. The air smelled of expensive perfume and shrimp cocktail. At the far end, under a banner that read Family, Legacy, Care, Margaret stood in a circle of admirers. She looked immaculate in silver, holding a champagne flute as if it were a scepter. I stepped onto the carpet. The murmur of the crowd didn't stop, but it shifted. Heads turned, eyes widened. I wasn't supposed to be here. I was supposed to be the tragic, unstable daughter-in-law recovering at home, or perhaps already packed off to a facility. Graham saw me first. He was standing near the bar looking pale and sweaty despite the air conditioning. When he locked eyes with me, he nearly dropped his glass. He wove through the crowd, intercepting me, before I could reach the center of the room. Claire, he hissed, grabbing my elbow. "What are you doing here?" I pulled my arm away. "I was invited, Graham. Months ago, remember. You picked out the stationery. You can't be here," he said, his voice a frantic whisper. "After everything. After the filing. After what, Graham? After your mother tried to kill me. Or after you helped her cover it up. People were watching. Graham saw them. He forced a smile that looked like a grimace, checking to see who was listening. "Please," he begged. "Just go, before you make a scene." "I am not here to make a scene," I said, stepping around him. "I am here to finish one." Margaret had spotted me. Her smile didn't falter, but her posture stiffened. She said something to the mayor, patted his arm, and glided toward me. She moved with the terrifying grace of a shark entering a feeding frenzy. "Claire, darling," she said, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by the surrounding circle. "How unexpected." "Margaret," I said. "Beautiful event, as always." "I didn't think you would be feeling up to mingling," she said. Her eyes flicked to the faint scar on my forehead, barely visible under my makeup. "Not with your condition." "I am feeling better than I have in years, actually." She leaned in, the smell of Chanel No. 5 wrapping around me like a chokehold. "If you say one word," she whispered, her voice ice, "I will have security drag you out, and then I will take your daughter." I smiled. It was the smile she had taught me. Cold, polite, impenetrable. "You can try," I said. A chime rang out, the lights dimmed, a spotlight hit the podium. It was time. Margaret pulled back, smoothing her dress. "We will discuss this later," she said. She turned and walked to the stage, ascending the stairs with the energy of a woman 20 years younger. She took the microphone. The room fell silent. 200 of the most powerful people in Ohio turned their faces toward her. "Thank you all for coming," Margaret said. Her voice was warm, maternal, filling the room. "We are here to honor my late husband, Harold. But more than that, we are here to honor the values he stood for." I started walking. I moved down the center aisle. My heels made no sound on the plush carpet. "Family," Margaret continued. "Loyalty, protection. The Whitman name has always stood for taking care of our own." I reached the front of the stage. Just as she paused for effect, I didn't stop. I walked up the stairs into the spotlight. Margaret froze. The room gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the air. "I would like to add something to that," I said. Margaret covered the microphone with her hand. "Get off this stage," she hissed. I ignored her. I turned to the microphone. I turned to the audience. "About family," I said. "About loyalty. I agree. Let us talk about that." Claire, Margaret said louder now. She signaled to a security guard by the wall. "I fell down the stairs at Margaret Whitman's house 3 weeks ago," I said. My voice didn't shake. It rang clear and true. The security guard started moving. "Except I didn't fall," I said. "I was pushed." The guard stopped. The room went dead silent. "I know that sounds dramatic," I said, looking out at the faces, the bankers, the judges, the neighbors. Unbelievable, even. Margaret Whitman, pillar of the community, pushing her daughter-in-law down the stairs. Impossible. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. I held it up. "This recording might not hold up in a courtroom," I said. "I want to be clear about that. I am a lawyer. I know the rules of evidence, but you are not a jury. You are her neighbors, her friends, her community, and you deserve to hear Margaret Whitman in her own words." I pressed play. I held the phone to the microphone. The sound of the front door opening filled the ballroom, then Margaret's voice, unmistakable and sharp. "She fell because I pushed her, Graham. Keep up." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Margaret's face went white. She lunged for the phone, but I stepped back. "Just like Beth fell," the recording continued. "Just like Sandra fell. They all fall eventually." The audio cut. The silence that followed was heavy, crushing. Margaret stood there, her hand outstretched, her mouth open. She looked at the audience. She looked for an ally. She looked for someone to laugh, to dismiss it, to save her. But no one laughed. Then the double doors at the back of the room opened. "My name is Bethany Mercer," a voice called out. Beth walked into the light. She wore a simple black dress. She walked with her head high. "I was Graham Whitman's first wife," she said, her voice trembling but loud. 20 years ago, I fell down those same stairs. I was paid $500,000 to never speak of it. But silence has an expiration date." And then from the side entrance, a wheelchair rolled forward. "My name is Sandra Whitman," the older woman said. She was frail, but she held the microphone Beth handed her with a grip of iron. "I was married to Roger Whitman. 15 years ago, I was institutionalized after my breakdown. There was no breakdown. I was silenced because I knew too much. 3 of us, past, present, and the ghosts they tried to bury. We stood together on the stage. Margaret backed away, hitting the podium. She looked small, suddenly incredibly small. "This is slander," Margaret screeched. Her composure cracked, revealing the panicked animal underneath. "These women are disturbed. Security! Get them out!" No one moved. "We have medical records from 3 different decades," I said. "We have the crystal fragment removed from my skull that matches the vase in your hallway. And we have your own voice." The doors opened again. Detective Torres walked in. He wasn't in uniform. He didn't have a badge, but he carried a file thick with papers. "Mrs. Whitman," he said, his voice cutting through the noise, "I think we need to have a conversation." Margaret looked at Torres. She looked at the sea of faces staring at her with horror and fascination. She looked at Graham. "Graham," she pleaded. Tell them she is lying." Graham stood at the edge of the stage. He looked at his mother. He looked at me standing next to the women he had helped erase. He looked at the room full of people who now knew exactly what the Whitman name stood for. For the first time in his life, Graham Whitman made a choice. He turned his back on her. He walked toward the exit, his head down, leaving his mother alone in the spotlight she had paid for. "You can't do this," Margaret whispered. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," I said. "We know exactly who you are, and now so does everyone else." Torres stepped onto the stage. He took Margaret's arm. It wasn't an arrest, not yet. But as he led her down the stairs, the flashbulbs started popping. The silence broke. The room erupted into chaos. I watched her go. The empire of silence had finally fallen. 3 months later, Sunday morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen table of my new apartment. It wasn't a mansion. The countertops were laminate, not granite. The view was a parking lot, not a manicured garden. But it was quiet. I poured 2 cups of coffee. The smell of roasting beans filled the small space. "You look good," Beth said, taking the mug I offered. "Free looks good on you." "It took me 8 years to earn it," I said. "Some of us take longer than others," Beth said. She took a sip. Sandra called. "She is doing okay. She is living with her sister in Vermont, finally getting real therapy. Turns out she was never unstable. She was just trapped." "And the investigation," I asked. "Torres is back on the force," Beth said. "The DA couldn't ignore the press coverage. They are looking at fraud, assault, unlawful imprisonment. The foundation is frozen. The hospital board voted last night to rename the wing." I nodded. I felt a lightness in my chest that still surprised me. "And Graham?" Beth asked. "He signed the papers," I said. "Joint custody." "He didn't fight. Once Margaret's lawyers dropped him, he folded. He sees Lily on weekends. He brings her home early. He looks relieved." I never got the acceptance I wanted from them. For years, that was the hunger that drove me. I wanted to be good enough. I looked around my small kitchen. I didn't need their acceptance. I needed to be able to look in the mirror. Lily ran into the room, her feet thumping on the carpet. She held up a piece of construction paper. "Mommy, look," she said. It was a drawing. 2 figures, one big, one small, both smiling. "No one else." "Just us?" I asked. "Just us," Lily said, climbing onto my lap. I like just us. I hugged her tight. 8 years of trying to belong to a family that never wanted me. And all along, my real family was right here. I looked over Lily's head at the counter. A small stack of business cards sat next to the fruit bowl. Claire Brennan, attorney at law, specializing in domestic violence advocacy. Margaret taught me something in the end. She taught me that silence protects predators. And speech, even when it costs you everything, protects everyone else. I would never be silent again. Claire's journey from a hospital bed to that gala stage reveals a harsh truth about the way we define loyalty. We often mistake silence for peace, believing that if we just endure quietly enough, the storm will pass. But as we saw with the Whitmans, silence isn't a shield for the family. It is a weapon for the predator. Real protection requires the courage to speak the ugly truth, even when your voice shakes. You might think keeping the peace will save you, but peace bought at the cost of your safety is just a slow surrender. If you are walking on eggshells today, or if you are shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's frame, ask yourself, what is the actual cost of your silence? Have you ever had to break a family rule just to survive? Please share your thoughts below, because just like Claire found with Beth and Sandra, you are never as alone as they want you to believe.